Hello, everyone. This is Angie from TechServe Alliance. Welcome to today's webinar, Gender Equity Progress in the Staffing Industry. There will be a question and answer session following the presentation, so please write any questions you want answered in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of the screen. We are also recording today's presentation, which will be available on the TechServe Alliance website and distributed to in follow-up emails. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Kip Wright, Chairman and CEO at Inspire Solutions.
Thank you, Angie, and welcome everyone to our webinar today, Gender Equity in the Staffing Industry. I am pleased to be here with three amazing panelists who I will introduce in just a moment. But I want to kind of set the stage and talk a little bit about the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion in business. And more these days, you're seeing companies that are recognizing the importance of that measure of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it really filters through every facet of the business, right? And the staffing industry is no exception to that. Not only do we have a thriving individual where we staff employees who actually help deliver on the services that we provide to our customers, but we affect the lives of nearly 10 million people every year on short and long-term assignments. And so the impact that this industry can have on diversity, equity, inclusion is profound. But even though we are an industry that overall represents somewhere in the neighborhood of 65% of our staff employees who are in fact women, that measure of equity doesn't seem to translate when you move into higher levels of the organization. And today we want to share with you some of the results associated with the second benchmark survey that we've done on the industry that we think highlights not only what progress has been made or still needs to be made, but also shows some unique differences in perspectives and why this is important, and maybe even some of the elements that might help us to drive that measure of equality. So first and foremost, excited to be here. I'd like to introduce my panel who will be joining me today. I'll start off with Denise Detmeyer. Denise is the CFO for Randstad North America. Denise, would you introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, of course. So thank you, Kip. That is what I am. I have been with Randstad almost 10 years. And as of January 1st, I'm also tagged with leading our global finance transformation. So in a dual role, and very excited to be here with all of you today. Thank you.
You bet. Second, I would love to introduce Sunny Ackerman, who is the president of the Americas for S3. Sunny?
Hi, everyone. Yes, Sunny Ackerman. Happy to be here. Been in the industry a little over 25 years, currently with S3, joined 2 years ago as the president, as mentioned, Kip mentioned, is North America, and also representing our global business transformation that we are currently going through as well.
Great. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Therese Baker, who is the CEO of her own company, but she has of Abtech, but she has recently been named as the chair for the American Staffing Association. So fantastic panelist to add to our equation. Therese?
Yes, good morning. Actually, it's good afternoon. Therese Baker with Abtech Professional Resources. And Kip, thanks for having me here. And I'm excited about the panel today. Thank you.
Great. All right. We thought we would start the discussion today off with a quick presentation, a quick kind of, if you will, walkthrough on some of the key elements associated with the survey. And as we go through this, I'm going to pause and ask our panelists to opine on some of the findings and offer some of their insights and observations along the way. Before we do so, I first want to thank TechServe Alliance for sponsoring this webinar. And TechServe, as those of you who have joined to know, is singularly focused on driving success of IT and engineering staffing and solutions through innovative programs and services. They operate in many respects as an association for IT and engineering staffing firms in this industry. And if you haven't been exposed to them and are in this space, please know that the resources they provide, the information they provide, frankly, the networking that is gained through that is a huge benefit and definitely worth exploring. Secondly, I introduced myself as the CEO of Inspire Solutions. I also have an equally proud title. I am a board member with the Women Business Collaborative. The Women Business Collaborative, or as we like to abbreviate, the WBC, its mission is to accelerate the advancement of all women business leaders together with the realization of gender diversity and pay parity in the workplace. And what we like to say, the easier way to say that is equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. The unique thing about the WBC is that our approach isn't to try to recreate this, but is to try to create enough awareness and enough collaboration amongst other organizations that are already out there driving various elements of business, of women equality, women diversity, leverage the force of collaboration to try to drive this mission. So really proud of the work that we do in that respect. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the survey itself. As I mentioned before, this is the second time we've been able to do a survey. We did our first survey of all times right during the pandemic in 2020. We were able to do our second survey late last year, so we've been able to compile the results, published it earlier this year, and finally getting a chance to share some of that. The survey itself, a little bit about it, as you'll see in just a minute. Very proud to be partnering not only with TechServe Alliance, but also with the American Staffing Associations, with staffing industry analysts, as well as National Association of Personnel Services. Those four associations and research groups have been instrumental in helping us to get the exposure. And frankly, a lot of them have their own initiatives with respect to gender equality. And it's been really great to drive that collaboration. We saw nearly 600 participants take the survey, so we do think we're reaching some measure of statistical, accuracy, so to speak. The survey itself was focused around getting a better sense of where we are in terms of gender participation within the staffing industry, to understand some key trends, some key progress, to get a better sense of where gender equity benefits the business or how it has an impact on the business. And more than anything, it's about creating awareness. And, through that awareness, we are able to drive the measure of progress that we hope to achieve. The survey itself, we saw a really good mix of different types of groups, both public and private companies, a lot of senior management, C-suite participation in this. You can see from an industry mix, we saw a pretty healthy mix, and in the technical and IT space, as well as engineering, the two of those combined, probably the largest percentage. So I think relevant to what we're talking about here with TechServe participants or audience, it's extremely relevant. Really good geographic coverage, smaller local organizations, regional organizations, a lot of national, even some global, a pretty good mix of small to large size organizations, which is fairly reflective of where I think the industry kind of maps out overall. So we think the participation is the right measure of participation. So where does all of that lead us? And I'm going to start with the biggest numbers, and then we'll peel the onion back and get a little deeper into it. In 2020, we saw 67% of the workforce that took that survey were women. Or at least I should say 67% of the respondents said their workforce is comprised of women. 48% of those women were on the executive team. 44% were in the CEO suite, and 36% were on boards. As we move forward, we saw most of those categories stay fairly static, maybe a percentage to change, which is certainly encouraging. Would been a real challenge if we saw that go backwards. We did see the percentage of women in the workforce drop, and it may well be, as I think about this, I think the survey itself was issued in late 2019. So it may be that COVID had some impact associated with the drop in the percentage of women in the staffing industry. But I'll also tell you that this slide for me potentially creates some misleading results. I think a lot of the survey participants that took it are leaders with firms that have a real interest in driving this measure of diversity. And so we may have a little bit of false positives when it comes to percentage of CEOs that are women, or maybe better put, you may have a disproportionate impact on some of the smaller companies that are women-owned and women-led. And so, the question for me starts to lead into whether or not, as you get into larger size firms, do these numbers hold true? So I'm going to pause here and actually ask my panelists to come to opine on that. And Denise, if you don't mind, you happen to work for one of those global respondents. What's your reaction to this? What do you think the balance looks like for larger firms?
Yeah, so we watch this as best we can with all the public reporting and who we deem everybody's a great competitor, of course, but those who are publicly traded where they share information. And we see in the kind of C-suite, so not even if they're CFOs, CEOs, but the executive females are around, they're less than 30%. So, if we do our math, because we watch it, it's about 28%. And if you look at everybody's boards, it's around 33%. So if you look at the average, I would say in large companies, we're around the 30% female, and they're generally in, I'll say it, not to stereotype and be typical, but the HR roles, sometimes the marketing roles. We hardly see a female CEO of a large global player. I think there's one female CFO. So it's a pretty different picture of that top end suite of executives for the larger companies.
And you hit on a point that I think is so relevant for many of us, is that's driving women into P&L and operational roles, and not those metrics not being somewhat misleading because they're in roles that might be HR or marketing centric. Not to say those aren't important, but I know that the balance across all of the executive roles becomes an important piece. Sunny, you work for also a global company, perhaps see yourself more in the mid-market in many respects in terms of size within the US. Tell us a little bit about your impressions here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, S3, gender parity is definitely high priority. I think for 2+ years, we've achieved a 50-50 leadership split at the global executive level, and an even greater percentage of women and leaders in the US, something we're absolutely heightened awareness around. I think outside the organization, there's not a pattern of mid-sized organizations, staffing organizations that have committed to gender balance. I think most often I find that interesting organizations with headquarters in Europe tend to consider gender balance more consistently, maybe because European countries require parity at the executive and board level. So again, our headquarters being in London, we do see a bit more of that as well. It's unfortunate though, I think, because again, readily available data shows that, companies with women in leadership are more profitable than those without. So I think it's definitely work that we still need to do within the mid-size recruitment space in our industry.
An interesting note. I'd love to come back and visit the survey results that you saw that showed that organizations are more profitable under women. There are some similar correlations in some of the data we'll get through. Maybe we can touch back on that in a minute. Therese, you have an interesting perspective. Not only do you run your own, small size organization, more entrepreneurial, but you now, as chair of the ASA, disproportionately represent a huge percentage of small businesses and the staffing sector. What are your reactions?
Well, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for smaller firms, right? They are more flexible. They have more control over the programs they implement. Looking at this slide here, we are up in 3 out of the 4 categories, though small, right? It is a start. And I think that those that are on the webinar today, one of the takeaway alerts that we talked about is, if you have not already done so, you should survey your own management team, your leadership team, your executive team, and what is the percentage of women and percent of men. I think this is a starting point for all organizations if they have not.
Fantastic. All right. Some great insights. I think all of that correlates. Let's dig a little deeper. I'd like to start to look at some of the results and actually separate what an organization looks like when it's run by a male CEO versus what it looks like when it's run by a female CEO. So let's look at that data in particular. So you can kind of see on this level, again, we'll kind of look at the highest level. You can see, first of all, we're just looking at this generically to see where we've seen changes. And again, we kind of showed you the high level numbers, but the board mix largely has not changed from 2022 to 2023. Although there's been, as Therese said, some slight improvement in that respect. Executive mix, again, some slight improvement. We've seen that go from 48 to 40, almost 49%. So certain good numbers. But let's dig a little deeper into that and ask the question, what does that look like if the CEO is a man? And what you see is the numbers shift quite dramatically. When the CEO is a man, only 20% of the board is comprised of women. When the CEO is a man, only 42% are comprised of women. Now, in fairness, there has certainly been some progress there, but it is still starkly different than what happens when the CEO is a woman. Case in point, when the CEO is a woman, you can see that the board mix goes to closer to 50-50, and the executive mix is definitely much more profound, 64%. So certainly a very big shift there. I'd like to pause, I think, on that slide. Actually, I have one more question, and then I want to ask Therese to opine on this. Then we asked the question around, does your executive team support and promote women at your firm? And, when the respondent is a man, they feel like they are doing a better job than when the respondent is a woman. And I think that's really interesting because it starts to filter in towards perspectives. So I want to go back and just ask Therese on this question. Tell me a little bit about these dramatic differences. Are you surprised to see such a difference in the business, and any other insights that you've noticed?
Well, I'm not surprised based on the survey participants, because 43% of the participants were small businesses, right, in the 1 to 25 employee range. And many were women who are employees, middle management, senior management, C-suite positions. But I think it does build on the whole awareness, which I think is key, because awareness creates action. The survey and the associations and groups that support this survey do a lot when it comes to awareness. I am concerned that women of color percentages are very low. And I think this is an issue. I think we need more awareness around how to lift up women of color. I think there needs to be more opportunity for women of color. Another takeaway alert, if you want diversity and different perspectives, create programs or let your employees attend programs that promote diversity. Talk with your employees about what they want to do and see in the organization. I think the slide that you had, Kip, that talked about men's perspective, right? I think there needs to be an open communication between management and the employees about the programs or what they want to see and how to build a program. I know that ASA has an internal team that promotes diversity, and I know they meet on a regular basis, and I know that they create change appropriately. So it might be as simple as having your own internal team.
Interesting. And I'll speak to that for a minute. One of the things that I'm very passionate about, and while I don't have a clear view on our audience today, I'm certainly hopeful that we have a good mix of this. I think if we're going to move the ball with respect to this level of mix, it's going to take men becoming ally of women and really intentionally driving a more conscious effort to create that mix. I mean, if you're going to see the movement, it's not going to come on the women CEO side. It's going to come from men intentionally driving it. I think that's an important takeaway. Denise, would love to see your perspective on this, and maybe any programs you think that might help with that.
So I can spend the next end of the call on all of this topic. So I will make it as brief as possible, but thank you for listening to my passion. I'll talk a bit about Randstad because it's in industry. I'll talk about the US. What we're doing in the US seems to be leading edge. Certainly in the industry, we'll share everything we can because we want this industry to advance in the inclusiveness and belonging in a meaningful way. So there's no secrets here. Even within Randstad, bringing that globally is now the benchmark practices of the US are now being brought globally. So it feels there's a cultural piece in some of the bigger global. Sunny, you might see that too, being a European headquarters. So I'll speak about the US, but understand that this is has moved global across Randstad. But we started really consciously aware of this 6-7 years ago, and we set up an executive diversity council with a charter, with a purpose, with legal documents to say this is what we will be and why. Our CEO was the chair. I, as the CFO, was the co-chair. So the leadership had to chair that. And as a CFO, we're really good at measuring, setting targets, progressing against them. So we got the data. We got the data of who we are, how we're composed, white, person of color, female, male, and we saw we actually have a gender issue at the higher levels. So the lower levels were okay, but SVP execs were a little bit different. So we did target setting and had surgical strikes in processes to improve that. And we stack rank. So my name, Dettingmeyer, comes on the list and goes, here's your slates. That's what we did. We don't do quotas, but a slate of diverse candidates is what has moved our metrics. So every job that we post has to have a diverse slate. Women, men, people of color, veterans, whatever that diverse slate is. And then I have a name, Dettingmeyer, that says 10 openings, 100% diverse slates. My next colleague, 10 openings, 80%. I didn't mean to make myself great. Maybe it's the other way around. That is how it works in our company. And after that started to make progress, we then progressed and said, who do you hire from the diverse slate? So not only have the slates, but how are the hires coming? We implemented training. So rather than call unconscious unconscious bias, which everybody has and you can't do anything about because you're a human, we flipped it and call it conscious inclusion. So how do you consciously include people in what you're doing and how you're working? We set up BRGs. BRGs present to the Executive Diversity Council. We have a website and anonymous email, ask the EDC. So what questions do you have? What are your concerns? Every people survey, we used to do them monthly, we now do them quarterly, has ED&I questions on it. How are you feeling? It allows people to comment. We read every single one of them. We set up a sponsorship program for our people of color, different than mentoring, where it's a sponsor is when you are in the room and your sponsoree is not there, you speak about them, you promote them, you understand them, you put them in their shoes. So we have had some progress as well in the people of color. We took the pledge, the I Act On pledge for CEOs, CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. And at the end of all this, we were honored, truly honored with Diversity's Inc. Top 50 Place to Work. We started at 30 and last year we moved to 21. It works. It works. It's like a plan, a strategic plan, a forecast, data, measure, plans, strategic strikes, fix what's broken, stack rank. It works. No quotas, but changing the culture around the ability to be an ally to everybody, to talk about what you're learning. It's been a remarkable, I'm very proud of the results, but still a long journey to go, a long way. Yeah, conscious inclusion is a really, it touches with a lot of people. If I'm on other panels and say that, they're like, genius, but it really shifts the responsibility.
And congratulations. Yeah, congratulations for the movement on that, move into 21. That's a profound jump. So it definitely shows that it works. I want to keep peeling this onion a little bit. And there's, I think we spoke a little bit to this. But again, when you look at, and we're going to start filtering back and getting into some of these different questions. But when you look at this and you ask the question about, does your executive team support and promote women at your firm? And you see that men think that they are promoting that more than women feel that they're being promoted, which is interesting. But I added this piece to really look at this and say, well, then how does that look if the CEO is a man, all genders, versus if the CEO is a woman? And you can clearly see that there is a much more stark belief that women CEOs are driving that, and probably no surprise when we looked at some of those other factors. But let me peel this even peel this even further. We asked a couple of really interesting questions that I thought might be worth talking through. And the first one was, why do women leave the workforce? And look, you see over here on the right-hand side, increased compensation, increased career opportunity, more flexibility. A lot of the questions, a lot of the responses we expected we would see. But I want to highlight a few things. Yes, both equally felt like increased compensation was an important driver. But watch this, the difference between how a man perceives whether or not a woman will leave the workforce because they want to advance their career is dramatically different than how a woman perceives their reason for leaving the workforce. It's 15% around advanced career for men respondents and almost 40% for women. And then, the other one that jumped out at me was this need for increased flexibility. Men don't perceive that that's an important piece for women who choose to leave the workforce or even to leave an employer. And then when you look at need more flexibility, on the women's side, it's almost 20%. So I want to pause here and come back and ask Sunny. Sunny, are you surprised to see this difference? And what are your reactions to this?
No, I mean, I think it made me recall the survey that McKinsey did in 2022 during that great resignation that we all experienced in 2022, where women were far more likely to resign and switch roles more than men. And the survey showed that women were just as ambitious as men, but indicated that limited career growth and outdated policies often motivated women, to resign. So I think there's, for years, studies have found that women prefer the flexibility in the workplace more than men. I think, 80% study of women and 52% of men favored flexibility. And I think this is likely because women are still primary, caretakers of children in the home, and the average household, looks at, managing chores and child rearing amongst, men and women during the pandemic. There's just been a resurgence of that. So it doesn't surprise me. I think there's absolutely still, work there to be done within our industry, of course.
Denise, would love to ask you the similar question on work flexibility. Why is it that men aren't more aware of this need, and how do we improve that?
Yeah, I hate generalizing, and I'm going to, so bear with me while I do that. Sunny, you mentioned it too. Generally in our world today, women are primary caregivers of something outside of work, whether it be children, elderly parents, volunteering in the community, taking care of a house, whatever that is. It tends to be the female gender that has that primary care responsibility of something else, and therefore generally men don't. And so the flexibility that women need it's very, very different. I am the product of my husband is the primary caregiver in our family. So a lot of people say, well, you get to be CFO because you have a primary caretaker at home, no different than a man would have a wife at home or a female partner. And I think, no, I'm CFO because I'm good at being but there is that play in there, right? There is a truth around the flexibility. And I've always preached when I'm asked about this, work-life blend is more realistic than work-life balance. Easy for me to say, I can blend. Most men can blend. Women who have to truly balance can't blend. And there's a difference. And so if you are in an environment where you're always blending, you can take the phone call, you can leave on a Saturday, you can work late, you can travel, everyone's got your back at home, whatever your home life looks like, you don't even recognize that you have that because it's just who you are and what you do. And if you have to balance everything and have sitters for kids and people take care of homes and visit your elderly parents or whatever responsibility you have at home, it's a constant fight of that balance. And so it's always front of mind for those in a balance scenario and hardly thought of in those in a blend scenario. That is my opinion. And how to change that is it comes back honestly to that conscious inclusion. Imagine if you were a single mom with 3 kids and a house to take care of with an ailing parent, and you schedule a late night meeting. Imagine. But you have to create the culture of enablement of discussion. And when I joined Randstad, this is a funny story. I didn't think of it till this moment. I was interviewing with the CHRO. He is male. And it was a Friday. Interview was an hour and a half. He said, before we start, I just want to let you know I have a hard stop at 5 because I have to go to my kid's Little League game. And I thought, you get to say that out loud in this company? Wow. Like you don't have to say I'm catching a flight or, I've got a board meeting. Like you get to say that. And it was just and it came from a male. And I thought, what kind of company is that you can say things like that? I've had female colleagues say to me, Denise, I'll do before COVID. I'll do the meeting, but I'm going to be calling in because I'm getting my hair done. My hairdresser can only take me from 3 to 5. And I'm like, not only can you go to the hairdresser, you're allowed to say it. So that culture creation, I think just it's not natural to a lot of men because they don't live that. It's not an excuse. It's not a forgiven, but that conscious inclusion of put yourself in other shoes. How could it be? I think is the way to change it. And
I
women
think,
being able to say, we need to leave. I'm getting my child, instead of I have a board meeting or something fancy to make sure you still belong.
yeah, I think the term conscious inclusion needs to be a takeaway for a lot of our audience here. I think that's an important piece. If you don't mind, I'm also going to point out another takeaway here, which is the importance of this isn't just in highlighting the differences, but it's also in recognizing that if we're in an industry where 2/3 of our staff are women, we ought to be a lot more focused on what women say is important to them if we're going to retain and or hire that talent. And otherwise, if you don't, you find yourself eliminating a pretty large pool of talent that you could otherwise recruit and retain. So I think that that's an important piece to take away from this.
Kip, if I could add to that thought, you have to also want that, right? So it just reminds me when I was looking for a CFO in one of my businesses, and the recruiting firm, I work for a recruiting firm, so I won't tell you who it is, but you can imagine. I said, can I have a diverse slate, please? And they said, there are no female CFOs. I'm like, hello?
Hello.
Hello? So wanting to adapt to what is needed for the talent, understanding that that talent is valuable. And I just, sometimes feel like, well, is in my day, it was, are you planning to have children? Does that mean what? I can't work so how do you eliminate the ease of, I just won't hire that. It's just easier not to. They're just not available. That's the key point there to get the change made.
And I want to pull Therese back into this conversation. And again, I'm fascinated not only by your personal experiences, but the weight of your role as chair at ASA. So much exposure. We also asked our survey participants to tell us a little bit about what types of policies are implemented to attract and retain women. And look, I actually tried to take the same slide and to look at some of the various differences. They're not as profound as what we saw in the other survey, which is certainly encouraging. I think there are a few here, like succession planning, maybe a few percentage difference, women advancement, maybe a few percentage difference, but not the stark differences that we saw before. My question for you would be, Therese, as a board member, what are you seeing with some of the other companies that is listed here that's working well, or maybe that isn't listed here that we ought to think about as well?
I think the first thing is creating those groups, like Denise mentioned, internally to grow your organization. I think that's the first one. And I think the second is supporting women participating in organizations or webinars or training that's external to the organization. So let your employees and your leaders attend programs. For example, TechServe, we've been having this women's lunch since 2007. 2007, we started with a couple of ladies. It was a great idea. We've been doing it. I think the last conference we had maybe 200 ladies attend. We had a couple men too, so men are welcome. But we have a topic per table. We may have a panel discussion. I've attended almost all of them. They're fantastic. Also with ASA, powerful networking opportunity. We have women in leadership. We also have the Women in Leadership Mentor Match. WBC has many webinars, and the beauty is a lot of them are virtual. So the people can do from home. They don't have to leave the office. You don't have travel time. And I think the takeaway alert for this is reach out to the associations and organizations, and we will share at the end of the presentation those that have collaborated on this survey, and get involved. Let your staff get involved. I just had one of my employees come and say, hey, my HR manager say, you know what, there's this 40 under 40 kind of award that I would like to put myself in for. And great, go ahead and do that. And then there's networking opportunities for that. So I think there's a lot of ways we can take advantage of external programs that smaller companies may not necessarily can afford to implement, but at least it's a start.
Fantastic. All right, I'm going to kind of stop the sharing for a minute. We're starting to see some questions come in, and I want to get to those in just a minute. I do have a couple of kind of, if you will, scripted questions that I had in my head that I want to really ask. And I want to go back, Sunny, if I can, to you. You made a comment earlier about surveys that suggest that women-led organizations may have an edge in profitability. Tell me a little bit more about your perspective on when an organization is led by a woman versus led by a man.
Yeah, I think interesting. I think firms with women in executive officer and director positions do post typically higher annual profits, typically without female leaders. I think women leaders can improve company performance in multiple ways. And some of the observations I've seen in my own organization and throughout my career is there's definitely greater awareness around skills diversity among the company leadership. I think Denise spoke about being intentional. I think there's absolutely more intention in the efforts and bringing awareness to the organizations in which they're in. And I think women in upper management positions may also motivate women throughout the company workforce to be inspired, kind of see it, be it, and to be able to lean in and create programs around that to bring awareness to the organization. So I think, again, being intentional and bringing that awareness is really, really important, and having programs around that to support that too.
Awesome. Denise, love your opinion on that.
I'm nodding my head and going spot on, spot on. There's so many angles to it. There's so many, I don't even really know where to start. So if you start with the intention of, Sunny, what I loved what you said is, like, when you see somebody who looks like you doing something that you didn't know you could do, or that is a possibility now rather than a dream, there's such a motivation there to move forward. We've come a really long way, but there's just so much more to go. I have a daughter, so I'll just share that with the whole audience. I try not to talk about my kids on calls like this, but when I had her, I had said no to the company that I had worked with. The Women's Network asked me to be an operating committee member, and I had said no. I was in manufacturing and I was in finance. And if there's a place where you're the only one, it's in manufacturing finance, right? So already female, everyone sees it. Shop floor comments, didn't join. And when I had my daughter, I thought, she shouldn't have to do this. So clearing the way for the next generation, the next person, your kid, your colleague, you've got to clear the way. And the effort is everybody. Kip, you talked about, I hope there's men on the call, right? The allies, it's everywhere. I'm rambling because I just want to say it's real. Having an image of who you can be, a dream of who you can be, and then, fight. I saw that one slide with the green dots and I thought, the glass ceiling is real. It's cracking, and it has cracked for a lot, and the hole has been made, and sometimes it closes up after the hole happens. It's real. Pay parity is not the topic of this conversation here today, but that is real. So if you're in COVID and you're in a family situation where somebody needs to be a primary caregiver, generally speaking, the one with the most pay stays in their job. Generally speaking, that's still the male.
Right.
So how do we get through all of that, Kip, is, not to depress at the end, but to say it matters. Look up and see who's out there, who looks like you, pave the way, pay parity, all of that has to continue.
And it's
And
interesting, as we go through this, I was kind of looking, and we're starting to build some Q&A, which I want to encourage everyone at this point to start putting some of your comments into the Q&A, if you don't mind. That'll be helpful for us to do this. One of the individuals kind of mentioned we're discussing gender equity. Where's the focus on? While there's a focus on women-based programs, where are the rest of the genders? And so. Yeah. I think it's an interesting question. The obvious difference is, we've got a panel of female panelists here. I think it's important that we do find a way to include and involve more men in this conversation. And that's why I put that plea out there in the first place. And I think it's a good takeaway. But any reaction to that question from either of you?
I'm going to, at the sake of dominating, speak again. Kip, I sponsored and exec sponsored and started the Pride Network in Ronstadt. So lots of genders, not only female. That surgical strikeness, first of all, recognizing that there's more than two genders. Secondly, the surgical strikeness of where are your issues. So I would offer, in some cases, Ronstadt has a male gender issue where this group of whatever it is in whatever industry we're in, which whatever role it is, are mostly female. So when you look at the size that we are and we have the ability to look at the totals, we might look good. But as you peel the onion and look at those surgical strikes, there are other issues. The overarching answer, though, is Ronstadt started with gender because that was the overarching issue. We could have started with veterans as an underserved, underrepresented group. We're doing now fair chance. So some people call that second chance. Could have been our underrepresented, understarted group. You have to start somewhere. And right now, the company started with gender. We've moved on. I don't even say on because it sounds second class. As that starts to gain traction, we took our learnings applied to people of color. As that gains traction, we're going to continue to apply. Some companies go big bang and try to solve the whole world hunger. We chose to pick the components, and that's why we chose the gender and the female gender as the overall issue, while admitting and knowing some of our surgical strikes are in male gender.
Yeah, and there's another piece of this too that I think is important. I forget whether it was Therese or Denise that mentioned it when we looked at the actual composition. That we're just not seeing the level of mix in terms of women of color. That yes, we might be making progress, but are we making progress in those areas? And there's a question just came in that said, let's also break down the genders as well. I think part of that breakdown is looking at the different ethnic backgrounds of genders. I'm presuming that is what this individual is asking. What? Any more thoughts on that? How do we do a better job of that? Therese? Yeah.
Yeah, I think again, it's awareness, because awareness creates action. And we have over 350 people on this call. So now we have just shared our experiences and our thoughts in this survey with 350 people who are now going to go back to their organizations, right? And say, hey, I just sat on this webinar and this is what I learned. And these are the questions I have. And these are the ideas and suggestions. So that starts creating the action. And I think that's what we need to continue to do. And I read a quote the other day that I wanted to share. I don't know who said it. I was just, on the internet, and it said, one person can't do everything, but everyone can do something.
Yeah.
That's pretty, if we all just do something.
Let's talk for just a minute about that something. One of the somethings that we've seen as a general movement, so to speak, is this idea of mentorship and really being more, if you will, more intentional with mentorship. And Sunny, I want to throw this over to you and maybe ask two questions. One is, were there key individuals in your past that served as a mentor, and how can women and men in leadership roles do a better job around mentorship? And I'm going to ask actually each of you as we go around to ask that question, to answer that question. So Sunny, start us.
Yeah, absolutely, Kip. You and I have worked together for many, many years, and I would say in many respects, you've been a bit of a mentor and a sponsor to me for many years in a previous company that we worked together at. But it's absolutely critical, I would say. And again, I love the idea of mentorships, support, but sponsors act and advocate for you in circles and in scenarios and meetings, maybe when you're not there. And I think that is absolutely important. I think there's a few easy ways to make a statement to support mentorship and sponsorship, taking initiatives to foster relationships. Doesn't have to be in a formal mentorship or sponsorship program, but taking time and making space for individuals within your organization. And it's important to create a sense of support and allyship within your own team. We've mentioned, I mean, Teresa's mentioning supporting local and national networking opportunities. There's so many different ways that people can get involved that, that support female-centric organizations. We just got involved with Women Who Code, and ensuring that promising female leaders have access to, different types of opportunities. But there's all kinds of trade organizations and events, ASA, SIA. I'm on the board of directors for Tech Serve Alliance, Association for Business Women's Association. There's just a lot of different opportunities for people to look at that. But conferences and internal events can be kind of easy way of means of connecting with like-minded women, and learning more and taking action, but carefully looking at some events based on the industry and then looking at networking to really kind of appeal to your demographic. But there's all different types of ways to be able to do this. But I think women I think at the position I'm in now, I feel like, I have an obligation to other women coming into the organization and other women that I work with. And I take that very, very serious. And I think all of us should, women and men.
Yeah, and again, I think there's a profound role for men to take in this, and it's not just mentoring women, but it's also mentoring other men to say, hey, make sure that you're conscious about it. And you see me referencing, I continue to go back to, we're talking about this because we know it's the right thing to do. But there are also some very profound business reasons why this is important. And, you can certainly question someone's motivation, but when you break it down to what's really important from an employee standpoint, a retention standpoint, a shareholder standpoint, it's really hard to argue those types of facts. And I like to really impress that upon people that I've had a chance to work with. Denise, ask you, has there been someone in your life that's been a mentor that really kind of helped, and just your reactions to that?
I'm super late to the game as embracing my femaleness as a leader. So I grew up thinking I was crazy. I needed to adapt. I didn't get it. I needed to sort it out until I was in my late 30s, probably. And I went to this wonderful place, Women Unlimited Forum for Executive Women. And as we met these other executive women, I was like, oh, it's not me. So that group of women that lead, that really put me on a point of, oh, this is just being a woman. You have to own it. I didn't want to own it. I just wanted to not be known as the female CFO. I just wanted to be the CFO. And I didn't want that label. And I think I fought it and wouldn't accept it for a really, really long time until at a moment I'm like, oh no, this is real and it is different. It's not better or worse. And to learn it. So that group of executive women were just the moment in my career where I thought, I got to shout out, I got to speak. It's got to be okay. I've got to share. I've had my very first official mentor. So I think you can learn from everybody, everything, every situation. That's how I grew up. I played sports. So my coaches have been more of mentors for me. Business is kind of a game and a sport and victory and that kind of stuff. So that helps. But I had a reverse mentor a year ago. So it was the very first official mentorship relationship I was in. And I had a Gen Zer. So not to say about age, but probably 25 years old, was my mentor. That is the reverse mentorship.
Yeah.
One of the scariest things I've ever done. I read about it and thought, that's genius. If I'm really going to be ED&I, I've got to do it. And I'm thinking, I have to listen. He tells me things my kids tell me, and I tell my kids, that's not how it is, people. But he's telling me that's how it is. And I'm thinking, wow. So that moment was probably equally impactful as that group of women executives to just really open your eyes up to a whole other sense of diversity and who you are and how you approach things and what you need to develop as a leader and so forth. If you haven't done that, I can strongly encourage it. It was fantastic. Our kids are our future. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was looking at some of the comments here too. Some fantastic feedback. If I get a chance towards the end, I'd love to read some of that. Therese, your reactions, so who's been influential for you?
Well, I will tell you, when I first started many, many years ago, and I started very young, so a lot of women weren't mentoring women. I had a lot of men mentors, and I was so appreciative and grateful for that. And I am so happy that we have come such a long way where women are mentoring women. And I always say, whose shoulders are you standing on? Because if you're not standing on somebody's shoulders, there's nobody lifting you up. And And I do think that we all are mentors. I think Denise mentioned this a little bit. Take, for example, you could be, at the coffee pot in your kitchen at the office, and, one of your employees comes up, or a friend or a peer, and says, hey, there's a position open in accounting. Should I take that position? Well, bam, look what just happened, right? So you're going to say, well, do you want to do accounting? Why do you think you shouldn't take the position? I mean, all of that is part of mentorship. So I think mentorship, you could have a peer mentor, a career mentor. You could have a crisis mentor. Let's say you have an issue in business, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to handle this. The list goes on and on. And there are all kinds of types of mentors. There's the advisor, the protector, the coach, the connector, the challenger, the sponsor, the affirmer. So I think it really just depends on where you are in your professional career and what you need. And I think we just need to look around and find our mentors. I'm with Denise. I like the reverse mentor. I mean, I learned so much, and oh my gosh, am I out of touch in some areas?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Your kids aren't crazy, right?
Right, exactly.
Denise, if I could add to that, you reminded me when I said no to the women's network, that I said no to because I was, thinking I don't want to be more female than I already was, and it's already different and weird. And I had a woman call me and congratulate me on my choice, because she said she struggled, she fought the battle, she got to victory, she got to the top. We shouldn't, why would we help anyone else do it when we had to struggle so hard? And I remember thinking, that is not why I said no. That is not why I said no. And by the time she had called me, I had said, well, a male mentor, leader, said he had given me a big speech about, you can stick your head in the ground and ignore it, Denise, or you can open it up and embrace it and help other people. I mean, it was the best speech of my career to knock me in the head before he sent me off to Forum for Executive Women. And I thought to myself, really, is that what people think when you're even not sure of your own self and you say no to things? Is it because
Right.
you're
Mhm.
being righteous? I was so offended by that. And I was able to say to her that I had changed my mind and I'm now supporting it by the time she called. But man, to think that that exists is just heartbreaking, right? But you're right. We've got to lift each other up. And I'll say the last thing, we train our women how to negotiate, how to ask for what they want, how to be forward, how to be present in a meeting, how to take a seat at the table. We have to spend equal time training and helping our men understand when a woman says, I'm happy in my job, it doesn't mean promote the guy who's asking to be CEO. It means I'm waiting for you to recognize how great I am to give me the next role. So we have to train people not to say that. They have to understand, men should learn to understand what to hear. And that reverse training is really, really important too.
There's a point that both of you have made that I want to kind of echo, and it's on this concept of reverse mentoring. So I'll do a call out for all the leaders on this call, men or women, and that is you need to do two things to facilitate that. One is you need to create the awareness and the openness so that individuals are willing to do that. And two, frankly, you need to find someone that can be that reverse mentor for you, that has the strength to be able to share those insights. I'm extremely fortunate to have someone on my staff that will call me out often and say, you did that again, or you're doing this. And it's like, oh my gosh. Now, look, there was a time not long ago in my career, I would have been real defensive about that. I would have been like, no, I'm not. Are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. But if someone perceives that, that's their reality. And I think that's such an important piece. I know we're coming up on the end of the session. Before I kind of close out with a couple of resources for everyone. And by the way, the commentary, if you guys who are watching this have not been able to kind of read along over in the chat, there's some fantastic stuff being said in the chat. If we didn't get to all the questions, I apologize for that. Some really lively discussions, but just if you maybe a minute or so with any closing thoughts, and I'll start with you, Therese.
Sure. I actually spent the last 3 months meeting with my staff one-on-one, individually. I asked specific questions, same questions of all of them. One of the questions was, what is your purpose here at AppTech? One of the questions is from 1 to 10, how do you like your job? And if they didn't say 10, how can I make it a 10? One of the questions is, where do you see yourself? What things are you doing? to get yourself to the next position. I've had an admin person in the same job for 3 years. She needs to get out of that job. She needs to move up. So even if you don't have a lot of money to do specific programs, you could start with just that. Just asking that question, what keeps you up at night? What are your goals? That will start your mentorship journey.
Sunny, closing thoughts.
Yeah, I would agree, Teresa. I mean, I think we just talked about reverse mentorship, and I love this. I mean, this not idea, but this really what happens. I think people often think more experienced you are, the less you need to learn. It's just absolutely not right. I mean, gosh, I learn things every week. I mean, however, newer, more junior team members, they have such valuable skills and fresh perspectives. We have a very young workforce, and I benefit from it daily. And I think, again, seeking that insight, you know, from people in the business, really understanding how people are feeling, working in your organization, what you can do differently. I think we all have a lot to learn still. And so it's just, again, really, you know, reaching out and creating that kind of two-way communication within your organization.
Awesome. Denise, closing thoughts.
Yeah, so my closing thought, it's talk about it. That's my closing thought, my closing advice. If you can stand up in your role, no matter if you're a C-suite or who you are, and just talk about it. George Floyd really changed Ronstadt. I was on a call with a Black female who I had just met, and I said, "How are you?" She said, "I'm fine." And I thought, do I take the chance or don't I? And I said, "How could you be fine?" And she said, she started crying. "I have 2 sons. I'm married to a Black man." And you've got to create the safety of the discussion, but you have to create the discussion. So if you're uncomfortable and you're awkward, I say take the pledge, the I act on pledge. The 5th thing that you have to do is share what you learned, be vocal, be open, and you can say, "I took the pledge. I have to do this." If you're uncomfortable starting the conversation, you've got to talk about it. That's the way that programs happen, mentorships happen, everything else we talked about is being vulnerable as a leader and talking about it.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yes. Yesing. Everyone's yesing and I'm yesing.
Ladies, this was a fantastic session. Before I close this out, I want to just share for the audience very quickly. How can you get involved? Okay, we've talked a lot about methods, about processes, about activities that you can do, some fantastic takeaways. But there's a lot of different ways to get involved. We've listed here a number of different contacts for you to reach out to for those with members of TechServe Alliance. Susan Donahue, on the American Staffing Association side, Diana Mertz is the right contact, although certainly Therese could be a resource for you. Staffing industry analyst Ursula Williams is working very closely with us on this initiative. On the National Association of Personnel Services, Trinette Cunningham. And then with respect to the WBC, I am extremely fortunate to be joined by Cindy Bennett and Teresa Creech as co-chairs in helping us with the staffing work stream. So any of these 5 organizations can be a great resource for you. Please don't be afraid to ask. In closing, thank you guys so much. I would leave you with this, which is be the change. It's not going to happen unless you individually do it. And it's, you know, I like to use that whole concept of 1 in a row. It's 1 in a row. This is where movements are created. This is where change is created. This is not just the right thing to do, but there's a profound business reason for this. There's a profound social purpose for this. Don't lose sight of the fact that if 2/3 of your organization are women, they're looking at you as leaders to make a difference. And they're expecting you to listen to things like this and to act on it. And so I challenge you all to take the pledge, to do something to make this move. Therese, Sunny, Denise, thank you so much for everything. You guys are amazing. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you everyone for joining us. And goodbye.
A big thank you to Kip, Therese, Sunny, and Denise, and thank you all for joining. We ask that you please fill out the survey upon exiting this webinar. Our next webinar will be Old School Sales Strategies Best Practices on Tuesday, March 21st at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please send any further questions to staff@techservealliance.org. Thank you and have a wonderful day.